Hey everyone, Dr. Shayna Keller, back today to discuss the article, Does Red Meat Actually Cause Diabetes Type 2? This was published in The Guardian back in the end of October of 2023, and I want to talk to you about it because that's not what I see clinically. So what we're going to talk about is diabetes and red meat, the Guardian article, and then the study that they're referencing out of Harvard, a really well-known clinical nutritionist out of Harvard, publishing lots of anti-meat information. And I want to talk to you about the stats in the United States, the stats on type 2 diabetes. And we're going to go through some little bit of details on that study so we're all on the same page as far as language and understanding clinical trials goes. It really helps us to understand like how we can get like clickbait with certain news articles. And then what I see clinically differs from this article, and then what you can practically do to actually start making changes that will positively impact your glycemic numbers, your hemoglobin A1c, your fasting glucose, and your insulin levels as well. So let's get into it. So The Guardian published, I believe is October 23rd of 23, published an article in The Guardian on, based on the clinical nutrition, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, published by Willett and others, called Red Meat Intake, the Risk of Type 2 Diabetes in a Prospective Cohort Study of U.S. Males and Females. Actually, this study was mostly females. It's also behind a paywall, and I sort of have some like ethical concerns about that, especially given that it's published through Harvard. Harvard has a lot of more money, and if this is really that big of a deal as the authors are making it out to be, you would think that it is morally required then that they would release it to the public so that we can be making these changes that will save America. The stats in the United States on prediabetes, according to the CDC, published in December of 22, 98 million Americans are living with prediabetes, which means they do not meet criteria that is considered diagnostic for type 2 diabetes. That generally means you need to have two numbers. You need to have a higher than 126 fasting glucose, and you need to have a hemoglobin A1c of above 6.2, I believe, maybe 6.3. I personally do not, or professionally do not, like hemoglobin A1c in and of itself. I really like to add fasting insulin in there, which if you have an insulin over 20, that would be another marker. So 2 out of those 3 markers need to meet the criteria. So prediabetes, you don't meet it. You're not sick enough. I see a lot of people in my practice that are pre-diabetic, and we catch things before they're a runaway train is the way I approach it. It's easier to take care of it before it becomes full-blown diabetes. The other stat, so more than 1 in 3 Americans has prediabetes. 38 million Americans have type 2 diabetes, or 1 in 10. That's quite a large amount. And also, let's not forget that this industry with the GLP-1 medications, the Ozempics and the semaglutides, really fabulous money in the pocket, and metformin is dirt cheap. It's like $2 for a pharmacist to buy, and it's pretty effective as far as reduction of blood sugar goes. I don't love to have to put people on medication, but sometimes it's necessary so we can bring things down and so people can kind of get a grip on their blood sugar while we're building in the lifestyle habits. So let's talk a little bit more about the actual study, what I could read without having to buy the study. 81% of this cohort, and we'll talk about what a cohort means, 81% of the people that were used in this study were females. They were also nurses. So we're going to talk about why that's important here in a moment. So there were 216,695 participants, and 81% of those were women. They are claiming that the hazard ratio, or well, their study has found the hazard ratio is a 62% increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes if you consume any type of red meat more than twice per week. Now, let's do some definitions here because it's always good when we're on the same page. The study is titled with a term that we might not know: prospective cohort study. What this means is it's a longitudinal over time cohort, the people, the participants in it, study. So a long-term cohort study following a group of people over time that have similar behaviors, similar habits, with a few differences, right? Because no one is actually the same human. We all maybe go to bed at a different time, or we choose to have different activity levels, etc. Choose to eat red meat or choose to eat processed Beyond Meat products. So the other things that I want to go through here, and this kind of piqued my interest when we were going through the pandemic: hazard ratio, relative risk, and absolute risk. These are very crucial to us understanding. Hazard ratio is a statistic correlation with an estimated relative risk. So it's equivalent in a way. It's not quite exactly there, but it's, good enough for our understanding today now. Relative risk is the probability of the occurrence of illness, in this case type 2 diabetes, in the exposed group. The exposed group being the non-control group, which this study did not have a control group. It was just these 216,000 participants that were or were not, they were reporting on their red meat consumption. Now, absolute risk is the actual incidence. This takes into account everybody, including the people that were not sick. So when we actually break that apart and understand, let's give an example. So say we have a control group of 100 people and we have an experiment group of 100 people, just for easy math. In the control group, one person gets type 2 diabetes. In the experiment group, 2 people get type 2 diabetes. This is considered 100% relative risk, because it's only looking at the one person that got sick and the 2 people got sick, and that is a 100% increase from the one. But if we actually look at the absolute risk, which takes into consideration the other 98 people in the experiment group, we only have a 2% risk of actually developing type 2 diabetes. So this is where understanding some statistics, and there's some good websites out there, or if you're lucky like me and you have a very math understanding husband, they can help you understand these concepts a little bit more. Little did I know that my medical statistics class and understanding data would be some of the most important, one of the most important classes I took in naturopathic medical school. So let's talk about the concerns I have with this study. There are a lot of potential confounding variables here that we have to take into consideration. Nurses. Anybody know a nurse? I know a few. I have quite a few in my practice, actually, that retired during the pandemic from nursing because of how stressful their jobs were. There is a huge shortage of nurses. There's a huge shortage of medical providers in general as a whole, because the profession is very stressful. We'll save the insurance conversation for another day. So we have nurses mostly working in hospital settings, under fluorescent lights on their feet all day, oftentimes without being able to meet their basic needs. They don't have time to pee, they don't have time to drink water, they don't have time to eat, they don't have time to sit down for a federally required 15-minute break for every 4 hours that they're working. If something bad happens or a patient is in need, that is going to take priority, and most helpers tend to prioritize others over themselves. So we have the profession itself and the risks that come with becoming a nurse. So we're talking about basic needs stress, which causes physical stress on the body. What about the emotional stress of seeing, a kid that was just in a car accident mangled, or maybe their friend comes in and they had an accident, or a patient goes into cardiac arrest and they do CPR and the patient dies anyway, right? Those are things that are emotionally hard for us to process, even if we are used to them, and that's just part of the job. It's just status quo. It's still challenging for us. All right, what about sleep? The nurses that I've seen in my practice, super stressed. They start ruminating. They have a hard time letting things go. They have a hard time winding down. And even some of the other medical providers I've seen in my practice, nurse practitioners, medical doctors, PAs, they have a hard time unwinding at the end of the day. So that impacts our sleep. And we know that sleep, when we get into a parasympathetic state, a rest and digest sleep, we can actually restore our body, reduce inflammation, help the body take out the trash. And if you're only getting, the average American gets 5 hours of sleep, that is not enough. An ideal circumstance would be 7.5 to 9 hours. And I know that's ideal. I know that's not for everybody. That is what the data is effective. And what I tell people is, hey, if you're too tired when you wake up to go to the gym at 5 a.m, get an extra hour of sleep. Your body is going to prefer that over, and take a walk later in the day, something a little less aggressive to the system. What about medications? There are certain medications that can increase our risk for blood sugar dysregulation. Certain types of high blood pressure medication, high cholesterol medication are problematic. And that's not including antipsychotics and other antidepressant medications that are also well known to skew our blood sugars. What about the fact that when we look at the average medical professional today, you can see they have a larger amount of adiposity versus lean body mass. Adiposity is fat tissue. And we spend so much time focusing on weight loss that we forget about making sure that we have a metabolic stable muscle mass. Lean muscle mass is very, very important. And so we'll talk about why that's important later in things that you can actually do. Let's see, lighting. Oh my gosh, the lighting situation. Fluorescent lighting, LED lighting is a little bit stressful for our body. We are meant to be outside with the sun, and if you live in an environment like I do here in Colorado, where it's a super high UV index all summer, you want to make sure to protect yourself from those highly damaging radiation rays. However, we do need sun exposure. And when we're inside a building with no windows and really way too much lighting, really should be about a fourth the amount of light bulbs that we have in most office facilities, and that's being problematic. And the last thing, and I'd really love to know how they did the reporting, but again, I refuse to pay for a study that I am not going to support if it's that actually big of a deal clinically. Reporting on a person's diet, oftentimes we see people put rose-tinted glasses on. Oh yeah, I did a good job. I didn't eat all those chips and drink, a 40-ounce Mountain Dew. And, I had chicken on my salad, and I had, some steak and mashed potatoes, right? We kind of forget that we had those snacks or whatever. So reporting is notoriously wrong. So much so that I actually stopped doing a 24-hour dietary recall in my practice. And based on one of my colleagues' recommendations, Mona Morstein, she specializes in diabetes management, both type 1 and type 2. She actually recommends a dietary, the amounts that you consume. Hey, how frequently in a week are you consuming red meat? How frequently in a week are you consuming grains and vegetables and soda, right? Kind of like a frequency questionnaire, as opposed to, let me remember what I ate yesterday. I really have to think about it. And if I have to think about it, and I know this is part of my profession, I'm going to wonder if everybody else has to take a second and remember what they did yesterday too. We have to take into account that we're all humans, and we want to see ourselves in a better light than we do. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but is that really the best way to go about this? Maybe not. So we've talked about the study. We've talked about the concerns. The individual, the main publisher, Dr. Willett, he's a prolific nutrition researcher. He has over 1,500 clinical studies under his belt. He's well known. Also, he's been an anti-meat advocate for over 30 years in his career at Harvard. So there's a Substack published by Nina Teachel. I pronounced her name wrong. I listened to a pronunciation of it, and I was like, oh, that's not what I would have thought. So excuse me. We're going to pull up a graph that shows the association between red meat consumption dropping precipitously over the last 40 years and the incidence of type 2 diabetes increasing. Does this mean causation is correlation? No. There's too many confounding variables. As I mentioned earlier, exercise, sleep, stress levels, profession, light exposure. There's too many things to take into consideration, which is the problem I have with a prospective cohort study is you're then taking an ideal population, not the average American population, where more than 1 in 3 Americans is pre-diabetic. Okay, so we have to be very diligent in understanding data, and these clickbaity Guardian articles, the Guardian, they published this thing and red meat's bad for us. Is it though? Is it? Because what I see clinically is the exact opposite of that. I've had one patient in my 300 patients that I've seen that was actually eating an adequate amount of protein for their body size. I make a basic recommendation of 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, which shakes out to approximately 75 grams of protein for female-bodied individuals and 90 grams of protein for male-bodied individuals. Give or take a little bit, and everybody's going to have different needs. And if you have chronic kidney disease and you have this and you have that, like, always consult your doctor. This is what I see clinically to be useful. And so these are the recommendations I make to my patient base and see results. I see people drop weight without having to try, without having to increase extreme vigorous activity level, just by shifting how we eat. So I have a really cool patient I've worked with, and I'm going to change information about them so you guys won't be able to identify. A woman in her 50s, she has a career as a male person, and she's not really willing to change her diet or her exercise regimen. Pretty high stress level, a little bit of tension in her marriage, and she comes to me on polypharmacy, 3 different medications, medications for high blood pressure, 3 medications for type 2 diabetes, and her A1c is stale at 10.7, 10.5, somewhere in there. And she gives me her parameters. Hey, I'm not willing to change this. This is my life. How can you work with me based on what I just told you? And these patients are really challenging for me, but it's really cool to see how small changes have a huge impact. So for her, what we had her do, since fast food was a mainstay in her diet, great. You can continue to eat fast food, and this is what you're going to do. You're going to get a half-pound McDonald's patty, and you're going to eat that first. And then you can have the bun and the fries. And I tried to get her to get a salad. She would sometimes do the salad, just like not a fan. Doesn't really like vegetables. Okay, fine. So we just had her do meat forward. Her A1c, and we did do an herbal supplement that had blood sugar supporting herbs in them. It's an Ayurvedic formula. Anyway, I will put that in the show notes if you guys are interested. But herbs are very helpful in this regard because it helps to resensitize our insulin response. In a year of working together with this woman, we were able to drop her A1c by 2.5 points. That's all we did. Getting her to do walking was not possible. It was just not something she was interested in or motivated to do for a variety of reasons. So to see an A1c come down with just some herbs and like a low dose of herbs too, like I've put people on triple the amount of herbs I put her on and not seen this type of result. So this person really did the protein forward, and we're talking McDonald's. So I'm not even saying like you got to go get grass-fed beef from your local rancher down the street. I'm saying if you eat meat and you prioritize eating meat before you eat all the carbs, which spike your blood sugar. So that's what we're trying to think about here is basic physiology. How can we understand physiology 101 and maximize our benefit, knowing how when we eat bread, we do this. This is why we eat bread with butter. It actually decreases that insulin or the blood sugar spike that we have because butter is fat, and fat takes longer to digest than simple carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates would include things like bread, candies and sweets, pastries, starchy vegetables, so winter squashes, potatoes, yams, or sweet potatoes. Trying to think what else. We do have to take into consideration with the starchy vegetables that there is some fiber in there. I'm a big advocate of increasing fiber as well with our blood sugar management. So usually when I have a patient that's a little more willing and able, I have them do protein and non-starchy vegetable forward diet. Prioritizing protein in the morning. So a lot of people come and they say, hey, I'm just not hungry in the morning. I've never been a breakfast eater. I just had a patient who told me this, and she was stoked to have a appetite for the first time pretty much in her entire life in the morning. And what we had her doing was getting 50 grams of protein in the morning because, for her, trying to parse it out in 3 meals was a little bit trickier. So we can always find ways to make things work for you and your lifestyle, right? Like that's part of my job is like, how do we make this fit for you and not just say it has to be this way? That's unrealistic. Like that's one of the things about studies that is so hard to then translate over to real life is because, we're going to have stress. We're going to have those days that we don't really feel like eating whatever the thing is that the doctor told us to do. And we just, grab the convenience foods. And, some of the convenience foods I choose to eat after learning what I've learned with my patient population is I will go and get Epic bars and other meat sticks of that nature that are they're processed, but they don't have a ton of ingredients. My general rule is less than 5 ingredients seems to be okay. And you don't need a chemistry degree to read them, right? If you are concerned about or confused about an ingredient in something, maybe you shouldn't eat it, or maybe you should consume less of it, right? And everything in moderation. I go this 80-20 rule, which Pareto's rule or something like that. I learned that from one of my followers last year when I posted about it. And that rule comes down to 5.6 days of the week. So if we can consistently take care of ourselves 5.6 days a week. So 5 to 6 days a week, we are doing the things that feel good and are necessary for us to improve the tick of our health in the direction that we want to. And there's not a right or wrong. Maybe you just don't care, right? You're going to eat that thing and it makes your blood sugar spike. And maybe it's not that big of a deal because it's not affecting your vision. Maybe it's not that big of a deal because your kidneys aren't being impacted. Well, kidney disease is growing precipitously in the United States, and it's tracking to overcome some of the other things that have been strongholds, cancer and cardiovascular disease. So, okay. Prioritizing protein, 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, about 75 for females, 90 for males. That can be more or less depending on needs. And breakfast, protein with breakfast is a must. None of this, and I'm not anti-oatmeal. You can do savory oatmeal. You can cook your oats in broth, ideally homemade broth, but if you just get packaged broth, that's fine too. So homemade broth, throw some beans in there, or if you have some cooked meat from the night before that's maybe seasoned or unseasoned, so if you do like taco meat in there, or hard-boiled egg or scrambled egg, or I was a big fan of poached eggs on my oatmeal. I took a lesson from from different Asian cultures that are big fans of congee, which is rice porridge, savory rice porridge, and you can make it sweet or not. And in America, we eat rice, but we eat oatmeal for breakfast. And oats, despite what some of these other influencers would say, there's a lot of goodness to oats. The other thing to consider with oats or grains in general is not everybody does well with grains. So this whole blanket statement, everybody needs to be keto, everybody needs to be vegan, everybody needs to be grain free, everybody needs to be lectin free or whatever that is. It's not true. Maybe for someone it's true, but we have to take into consideration the individual and the individual needs. I do clinically see the blood type component playing a role in people's ability to digest carbohydrates a little more efficiently. Generally, my type A blood types do better with more carbs, and my type O's do better with less carbs. So more non-starchy veggies, more protein. And my type A's do better with a little bit less protein and more carbs. And so we have to find the right amount of fuel, right type of fuel, right amount of fuel for the body. It gets complicated, which to then take a blanket statement and say red meat causes all these problems. There are so many nutrients that we get from only eating animal products. Sure, you can get B vitamins from nutritional yeast, but they are analogs of B12 that our body does not recognize. So you really do have to supplement if you are choosing to eat a predominantly or strict vegan diet. What about vitamin A? Heme iron, which is far more absorbable than non-heme iron that you get from things like spinach. It is there, but it's not the same. Okay, and then the whole protein, protein is just as bioavailable in plants. It's not, though. It is not as bioavailable, and really the important thing is that we're getting a complete amino acid profile, and when we eat red meat, we are getting a complete essential amino acid profile, and I can't remember the 8 essential amino acids, but essential amino acid means essentially our body cannot produce them, and we have to get them from our diet. So when we talk about adding products like Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat, and you look at the ingredients, there's more than 5 ingredients, and some of those ingredients, I'm like, what is that? Why is that in my food? There's soy product, there's corn product, both of which are genetically engineered, which has its own set of problems. And I know there's political there, but does my fake meat really need to taste like meat? That's also weird that now we're involving chemistry and we're changing our taste receptors to make it seem like we're getting meat when we're really not. What's the big deal with eating a steak? Clinically what I see, eating meat does not make blood sugar worse. It improves blood sugar consistently across the board. And like I said, I've had one patient that's eating adequate amount of protein. in my 300. And this is just the beginning of my practice too. So I'm 3 years in and I've seen one person. And most of my ladies are consuming a fourth the amount of protein. Maybe they're getting a protein with one meal a day. We're talking people that have weight gain. They're unable to lose weight. They feel like they're not getting good sleep. Their hair is falling out. Their thyroid's upset. They feel anxious. They have terrible PMS. They stopped menstruating really early, like in their early 30s, and they're in perimenopausal already. Like, what's going on here? We are undernourished and over-caloried, a lot of us, but a lot of the women I see are not eating enough. And so when I get people to actually start eating, specifically my ladies, when I get my ladies to start eating enough, and especially protein, because we're all worried about like being bulky, especially my mom's generation. It's like, we don't want to be bulky. We want to be petite, well-tolerated women. Well, I want you to not have osteoporosis when you turn 50. And when you have muscles, so this is good. I wanted to talk about muscles. Lean muscle mass. What is that? That is our musculature, not just our fat tissue. Our musculature, we spend so much time focusing on, I need to lose weight. That is a negative health goal. That is not something I talk about with my patients. I don't even weigh my patients because I don't find it to be useful. What's useful metrics for me? How do your clothes fit? How do you feel in your body? You feel bloated and you get like kind of lines when you wear your pants that you were wearing in the morning that were fine, and now all of a sudden they're really tight by the end of the day. Okay, we have a little bit of work we can do here. And I'm telling you, it's not just the sodium that makes you bloated. There's a lot of other things going on, and not eating can make a person bloated. Or eating, undernourishing ourselves can make a person bloated because our body's like, hey, we need food. We're going to kind of start finding food from other places. So when we don't eat enough protein, we start to waste our muscles. We call it sarcopenia. Sarco is muscle. Penia means decrease in muscle. Maybe you've heard osteopenia, which is like the precursor to osteoporosis, where you actually have thinning of your bones and are at higher risk of fracture. And this is determined with a DEXA, which is a bone scan that looks at your the neck of your femur, a couple of your vertebrae in your spine, and I forget what the other one is. There's usually 3 markers. So how does osteoporosis and lean muscle mass play a role in this? And I do find that osteoporosis and type 2 diabetes in my menopausal women go together. So we get that little extra belly weight after we go through menopause, a little bit extra in the hips. I try and frame that around like, hey, if you do fall, you have a little extra cushion, less likely to fracture, which is good because hip fractures are really difficult to come back from. Not impossible, but difficult. Better to prevent. So lean muscle mass. The primary fuel source for our muscles is sugar, glucose. So this whole like we need to be low carb, and that's the whole like purpose of the keto, right? But the keto thing is that you have to be in ketosis. Ketosis is a biochemical shift in our energy use. If you have bread today, it's likely going to take you 3 to 7 days to get back fully into ketosis. So there's no such thing as a cheat day when you're doing keto. You're either keto or you're not. There's not an in-between. And a strict keto diet is less than 5% carbs. Very few people are actually doing that. They're doing a modified like Atkins or a really low carb diet. Just be correct in your usage because keto actually means something chemically in our body. And it takes time to shift there. And that's where you get the keto flu, is that shifting over into using ketones instead of glucose. I'm not a huge advocate for the ketogenic diet unless you actually have a neurological issue. And I've seen benefits, although I don't see cancer patients. I have seen benefits for people dealing with cancers. And I generally refer to colleagues or another friend of mine who does nutritional consulting for naturopathic doctors and cancer patients. And extensively uses the keto diet. But let's go back here. When we are looking for lean muscle mass and we're not getting enough protein, protein is the most satiating of all of the 3 macros. Protein, fats, and carbohydrates are the 3 macronutrients that we need. Protein is the most satiating, so that's why I push the protein in the morning for breakfast, right? Because when we eat breakfast that's protein rich, we're less likely to have our drop off at 10 a.m. And if you've ever had oatmeal that doesn't have a ton of protein in it in the morning, and not everybody has this effect, but I'm one of those people that if I eat oatmeal that's just berries and milk and some sugar, I'm going to have a blood sugar drop at about 9:30, 10 in the morning and be like hungry. I'm ready for another meal and I just ate an hour and a half ago. And I find this to be true for a lot of people. But if I put a bunch of protein in there, some almond butter, I have some hard-boiled eggs, or I have some beans on the side, and I know that sounds weird with your strawberry oatmeal, but for me, it's about functionally eating and making sure I feel good. That way I can make it to lunchtime and see my patients through the day and be able to sit down and focus on their story and what's going on in their case. So protein stabilizes blood sugar. It's the most satiating. That means that you're not going to be craving that, so okay, you have coffee and a pastry for breakfast, or maybe you just have coffee, which is a lot of people. And by about 11 o'clock, you're pretty damn hungry, but you're like hungry now. You don't have time to, cook something for 20 minutes, type of a thing. You are ready now to eat. So what do we generally do when we're like hungry now? We don't always make the best choices for our health. We choose the thing that's quick and convenient. And man, I'm going to have that pastry, or like there were donuts in the office lunchroom. So I'm going to have a donut, and that's going to be my lunch. Or maybe I'm just going to have a piece of fruit, or maybe I'm just going to have a salad with, a sprinkle of cheese cubes or a sprinkle of tuna on it. And when I say a sprinkle, I'm talking like a tablespoon, which is not enough protein. Remember, we're aiming for 25 to 30 grams per meal, which looks like a third of a pound of ground beef, about 3 ounces of fish. Fish is actually the most protein dense compared to the different types of animal-based proteins. Okay, so we're talking about balancing blood sugar. We're talking about glucose being the primary fuel for the muscles. So you just have dinner, and usually Americans eat dinner as the largest meal of the day, which I find to be less beneficial. If we eat our biggest meal of the day at lunchtime or breakfast, that would be ideal, but we want to sit down with our families, so fine, we can compromise. I don't care if it's negative 20 outside, you bundle up and you take your butt for a walk around the block. Because now what you're doing is and I'm not saying go run, don't do a brisk walk, you're going for a gentle stroll. 10 to 15 minute walk is what the data shows maximum benefit, which is a block walk in my neighborhood. That helps us to uptake any sugar that we ate in our meal into our muscles, so we can store it for the next time we need to use our muscles. And it also helps to start with digestion, kind of like a gentle rinse in the digestive tract when we go for a little bit of a walk. So that's something that's really practical you can do. Prioritize protein, get non-starchy vegetables with every single meal, and take a 10 to 15 minute walk after your largest meal of the day, generally dinner time. I know in the Northern Hemisphere here, it's getting cold, but suck it up. I don't really know what to tell you. With more than 1/3 of Americans having type 2 prediabetes, we need to do something about this, because this is not okay in my mind. We are setting ourselves up for a healthcare disaster that's, well, we're maybe already there, but so one more note on muscle mass. We focus so much on losing weight, we forget that we have to have strong muscles to support our bone health and our metabolic health. When I was in school, which I didn't graduate that long ago, the importance of muscles as a metabolic organ, not just a skeletal organ. Metabolic meaning part of our metabolism. Our muscles process blood sugar and use them. When we are not using our muscles because we're sitting on our butt all day, I'm a doc and I sit on my butt all day when I'm with patients. I try to take myself for, a 10-minute walk when I have a space in between patients, but I don't always get to. So I'm just as sedentary as a lot of other people, but I do try and prioritize movement earlier or later in the day to make sure I'm getting that in. And I'm sharing this with you so I'm a human too, and I'm trying to figure it out just the same. When we don't use our muscles, they waste. Our bones then waste. We then, are blobs sitting on the couch, and, we're kind of like a weak version of our human ancestors that we've descended from. We're talking people that fought saber-toothed tigers. Maybe they didn't have a good brain, but they were smart enough to be able to fight them off, right? Or maybe that was just in the movies. I don't know. When we have weak muscles, we have weak bones. We have poor metabolism. Poor metabolism affects 92% of Americans, and metabolic health issues, metabolic syndrome, is 3 of the 5 criteria: blood sugar, hypertension, cholesterol issues, waist circumference, and what is the 5th one? I always forget the 5th one. But if you have 3 of these 5, and I'm not remembering the 5th, we then have a problem. So what is the thing that I recommend? Yes, walking, strength training. And I tell my patients functionally, okay, get a kettlebell, get a 10-pound kettlebell, put it next to your desk. When you get up to go pee, you carry it in your right hand to the bathroom. You put it down. You go pee, you wash your hands, you carry it in your left hand now, kind of like a little suitcase. So there are very functional ways we can start adding in using our muscles. Peter Attia and what's the dude? Andrew Huberman have really gotten into rucking, which is where you basically put a backpack on and you put some books or some rocks or something else heavy in it and you go for a walk in your neighborhood. We walk our dogs at least twice a day, sometimes 3. If we threw a pack on, like if we were prepping to do a backpacking trip or something, or just prepping to be a human just in case, prepping to preserve your bone health later in life, prepping to make sure you have muscle mass to keep your body safe and healthy and reduce your risk of blood sugar issues. That is a good way to do it. And simple. You don't have to go buy expensive equipment. You don't have to go to some stuffy gym that smells bad with dudes wearing too tight of clothes. Like, you don't have to do any of that. Let's make this super accessible. So, in summary, clinically, red meat does not cause type 2 diabetes. That is not what I see. And yeah, my population is a hell of a lot smaller than their prospective cohort is, but I guarantee you I am not the only professional that is seeing red meat not be the problem here. Correlation does not mean causation. And when we take into consideration the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different potential confounding variables, that's a lot of things that we cannot control for in day-to-day life unless we put these people in a lab. So we have to take data and then real life and know that sometimes there's crossover and sometimes there's not. The handful of things that you can do to support yourself without taking supplements, because you cannot supplement your way out of a bad lifestyle. Prioritizing protein and non-starchy vegetables with every meal. Leafy greens are my favorite way to add it to breakfast. Collards are my preferred. Kale is kind of overrated. Taking a 10 to 15 minute walk after dinner, or your largest meal of the day, which for most folks is that. Strength training, and make it yours, make it functional. Hell, you don't even have to get a kettlebell. Do 20 squats right now. Stand up and do 20 squats. Stick your butt out like you're trying to sit down on a chair behind you if that you don't really know how to do a squat. 20 squats is a lot. Try to do 20 push-ups. It's tough. Well, unless you're like a gym bro. Okay, so we have walking, we have protein forward diets, we have strength training, and we have... I think those are the 3 main things. And notice that I didn't say don't eat carbs. I said a protein forward diet. When we actually prioritize protein, we're not as hungry for the starchy carbs. And I notice this about myself with the education I've been providing my patients. When I have elk steak and mashed potatoes and some green beans sitting in front of me, the first thing I want to do is go take a bite of those potatoes because they're going to make me feel real good. But if I take a few bites of that steak first, have some vegetables, and then have some potato, really awesome. So there's a lot that we can do without having to worry about medications, without having to jump into some rigorous running la 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 la. Don't overthink it. There's a lot that you can do at home right now without having to do anything that costs you an arm and a leg. And that can happen. Cost you an arm and a leg, blood sugar dysregulation, causing ulcers that become gangrenous. So diabetes is a serious issue in America and in the world, I would bet. And it's a highly profitable industry. The medical industrial complex wants us sick. So, in summary, red meat does not cause type 2 diabetes, at least not what I see clinically in my population. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do for my next podcast episodes coming up, but thank you for tuning in.